Have you ever noticed something deeply unsettling? You do something that is universally praised as healthy, responsible, even heroic, and somehow, months later, your body begins acting like it's under attack. Your shoulders stiffen before breakfast. Your neck feels as if invisible hands have been tightening the same rusty bolt every single morning. You stretch, crack, massage, buy the ergonomic chair, purchase the orthopedic pillow with the fancy memory foam that promises to remember you better than your own relatives. Nothing lasts. The pain always returns. Most people blame screens, smartphones, bad posture, long work hours. But what if your neck isn't the real victim? What if your brain is? Here's a strange question. What if one of the most respected health habits in modern society could, under very specific circumstances, nudge your nervous system into a state where your muscles never truly relax? Not because blood donation is bad, not because doctors are hiding some evil conspiracy, but because biology has a wicked sense of humor. Imagine removing one tiny component from a Formula One race car. Just one. The engine still starts, the steering still works, the tires still spin, but under pressure, everything begins falling apart. The human brain works the same way. There is one mineral that quietly sits in the background, asking for almost no attention. It doesn't have celebrity status like protein. It doesn't trend on wellness podcasts like magnesium. It doesn't come wrapped in miracle marketing promising to transform your life in 14 easy payments. It simply goes to work every second, helping cells breathe, helping neurons fire, helping millions of microscopic power stations inside your body generate energy. Iron, not glamorous, not exciting, just ridiculously important. Now imagine losing a little, then a little more, then repeating that process over months or years without fully replacing what disappeared. Your blood tests may still look acceptable. You still go to work. You still smile. You still answer emails you secretly wish would disappear forever. Life continues, but inside your skull, something subtle may begin shifting. Your brain is an energy addict. It consumes roughly 20% of your body's oxygen while making up only about 2% of your weight. That's an astonishing deal. It's like owning the smallest apartment in the city while somehow receiving 20% of the electricity bill. And iron is deeply involved in delivering that oxygen. Less available iron doesn't automatically mean catastrophe. Human biology is wonderfully resilient. The body compensates. It prioritizes. It reroutes resources with incredible intelligence. But compensation always has limits. Here's where things become unexpectedly fascinating. Deep behind your forehead sits the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as your calm, rational executive, the CEO, the orchestra conductor, the adult in the room. Whenever something startles you, whenever someone cuts you off in traffic, whenever your boss sends an email that begins with just a quick question, the prefrontal cortex is supposed to evaluate the situation before your emotional system slam the panic button. Now meet its dramatic coworker, the amygdala. Tiny, ancient, brilliant at survival, terrible at relaxing. The amygdala evolved to detect danger before you consciously recognize it. That's incredibly useful if you're facing a charging predator. Slightly less useful when you're staring at an Excel spreadsheet. Unfortunately, your amygdala isn't particularly interested in the difference. Its philosophy is beautifully simple. When in doubt, scream. If the prefrontal cortex is well supplied with energy and functioning efficiently, it keeps that emotional alarm system under control. Easy, balanced, measured. But neuroscience has increasingly shown something remarkable. The prefrontal cortex is metabolically expensive. It demands enormous energy. When the brain's energy balance is compromised, even modestly, higher order cognitive control can become less efficient before more obvious symptoms appear. This doesn't mean every person with lower iron suddenly loses emotional regulation. Far from it. Human brains are incredibly variable, and many factors influence stress resilience. But researchers continue exploring how iron status, brain metabolism, neurotransmitter systems, and emotional processing may intersect in surprisingly complex ways. Science is still filling in parts of that map, yet the direction is compelling. Now picture a city during a rolling blackout. Hospitals receive electricity first. Traffic lights flicker. Office buildings dim. Luxury stores shut off their displays. Everything keeps functioning, just not quite as smoothly. Your brain performs similar triage. And when executive control becomes even slightly less efficient, guess who gets louder? The amygdala. Of course it does. It's been waiting for this promotion since the Stone Age. I knew they'd need me eventually. Suddenly, small inconveniences feel bigger. Stress lingers longer. Recovery slows. Your internal alarm system becomes just a little easier to trigger. Not dramatically, quietly, persistently. Like a smoke detector with dying batteries that chirps at 3 in the morning. Not enough to burn the house down, just enough to make everyone miserable. And that's only where the story begins. Because once that alarm system starts staying switched on longer than it should, another powerful biological player enters the stage. One that can reach far beyond your thoughts and all the way into the muscles holding up your head. Think about the last time you felt genuinely terrified. Not mildly annoyed. Not irritated because someone reheated fish in the office microwave. Real fear. Your heart accelerated before you consciously understood why. Your breathing became shallow. Your muscles tightened. Your vision narrowed. You didn't make those decisions. Your nervous system did. Long before civilization invented calendars, smartphones, or social media arguments about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, survival depended on one simple rule. Move first, analyze later. The brain evolved accordingly. When the amygdala senses potential danger, it doesn't politely request permission. It launches a biological emergency broadcast. One of its fastest communication routes reaches a tiny structure buried near the center of the brain, the hypothalamus. Think of the hypothalamus as mission control. Small, unassuming, exceptionally busy. It constantly monitors body temperature, hunger, thirst, sleep, hormones, and stress, coordinating systems that never take a coffee break. When the amygdala sends a distress signal, the hypothalamus responds almost instantly. Within moments, the sympathetic nervous system begins preparing your body for action. Heart rate rises, blood flow shifts, stored fuel begins entering circulation. Your senses sharpen. Then comes another pathway that works on a slightly slower timeline but leaves a much longer footprint. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Scientists simply call it the HPA axis because life's already complicated enough. Picture 3 dominoes. The hypothalamus tips the first. That activates the pituitary gland. The pituitary signals the adrenal gland sitting above your kidneys. And finally, cortisol enters the bloodstream. Now, cortisol has developed an unfair reputation. People speak about it as though it's the biological equivalent of a movie villain twirling a mustache. In reality, cortisol is essential. Without it, humans wouldn't survive. It helps regulate blood sugar, supports immune responses, maintains blood pressure, coordinates metabolism, keeps us alive during illness, fasting, injury, and countless daily challenges. The problem isn't cortisol itself. The problem is duration. Imagine borrowing your neighbor's chainsaw, using it for 10 minutes to trim a fallen tree. Excellent tool. Sleeping with the chainsaw running beside your bed for 6 months. Now you've invented an entirely new category of bad decisions. Stress biology works similarly. Short bursts help. Long-lasting activation slowly changes the body's operating conditions. Researchers have repeatedly shown that chronic psychological stress can influence muscle tension, pain perception, sleep quality, inflammation, and recovery. Notice something important. Not every person experiencing chronic neck pain has elevated cortisol. Not every individual with elevated cortisol develops chronic pain. Biology rarely follows a single straight line. Instead, multiple systems interact simultaneously. Genetics, sleep, physical activity, psychological stress, previous injuries, nutrition, and countless environmental influences. That's exactly what makes medicine both fascinating and occasionally infuriating. Still, one observation keeps appearing across decades of research. When the brain remains in a prolonged defensive state, muscles often receive the message, especially muscles responsible for protection. Think about your neck for a moment. Why does it tighten during stress? Because evolution isn't stupid. Your neck supports your head. Your head protects your brain. If danger approaches, stabilizing that region makes remarkable evolutionary sense. The trapezius, the levator scapula, the deep cervical muscles. These aren't lazy structures randomly deciding to ruin your afternoon. They're responding to commands generated far upstream, almost like loyal security guards who never received the memo that the emergency ended 3 weeks ago. Imagine hiring bodyguards for a celebrity. A real threat appears. The guards surround them. Perfect. Threat disappears. But the guards refuse to leave. They keep pushing everyone away, blocking every doorway, sleeping in the hallway. Eventually, the protection itself becomes exhausting. Your muscles can behave in surprisingly similar ways. Persistent neural signaling encourages persistent muscle activation. Tiny contractions become habitual. Habit becomes stiffness. Stiffness alters movement. Altered movement creates discomfort. Discomfort generates more stress. Stress reinforces the same neural circuits. Congratulations. Your nervous system has accidentally subscribed to the world's least enjoyable monthly membership plan. Then another subtle shift begins. When muscles remain guarded for extended periods, blood flow, local metabolism, connective tissue behavior, and pain sensitivity can all change over time. Researchers are actively investigating how chronic stress contributes to these processes. The evidence supports meaningful connections, although scientists continue debating the precise mechanisms and how strongly they vary between individuals. That's an important distinction. Science advances by refining questions, not by pretending every mystery has already been solved. Meanwhile, your body doesn't care whether you understand the mechanism. It simply adapts, day after day, hour after hour, without asking your permission. And here's the twist almost nobody talks about. What if the entire chain didn't actually begin inside your neck? What if the stiffness gripping your shoulders every morning was merely the final chapter of a story that quietly started in your bloodstream months before? Most people imagine neck pain as a mechanical problem. Something must be out of alignment. A disc, a joint, a muscle pulled the wrong way. And sometimes that's absolutely true. Trauma exists. Arthritis exists. Nerve compression exists. Medicine would be wonderfully simple if every aching neck came with a giant flashing arrow pointing at the exact culprit. Unfortunately, biology prefers detective novels because muscles are not independent contractors. They work for the nervous system, and the nervous system works with whatever resources it has available. Let's return to iron for a moment. Iron doesn't simply help carry oxygen through the bloodstream. Inside your cells, it also participates in countless biochemical reactions that allow mitochondria to produce usable energy. Think of mitochondria as microscopic power plants. Every thought you think, every heartbeat, every muscle contraction, every blink, every sentence you've heard so far, all of it depends on these tiny energy factories operating continuously. Now imagine those factories receiving just enough fuel to keep the lights on, but not enough to run every department at peak efficiency. Nothing shuts down overnight. Instead, performance slowly degrades. The body becomes remarkably skilled at prioritizing. Essential systems continue operating. Less urgent functions become more economical. The result isn't dramatic collapse. It's subtle compromise. You may feel mentally drained before lunch. Exercise feels strangely harder. Recovery takes longer. You become more vulnerable to prolonged stress. Again, this isn't a universal outcome. Iron deficiency exists on a spectrum. Some individuals experience obvious symptoms. Others compensate surprisingly well. Severity depends on numerous factors, including overall health, nutritional status, age, medical conditions, and how rapidly iron stores decline. That's why physicians evaluate the entire clinical picture rather than a single laboratory number. Now, here's where neuroscience becomes especially interesting. Several neurotransmitter systems involved in motivation, attention, and emotional regulation, including dopamine, depend directly or indirectly on iron-dependent enzymes during their synthesis. That doesn't mean slightly lower iron suddenly erases dopamine from your brain. Human physiology isn't that fragile. But researchers have long recognized that iron availability can influence these pathways, particularly when deficiency becomes significant. Imagine trying to run an orchestra while half the musicians arrive late. The concert still happens. The melody is recognizable, but something feels off. Timing slips. Harmony weakens. The audience can't always identify the problem, They simply know the performance lacks its usual brilliance. Your brain notices similar inefficiencies. The prefrontal cortex begins working harder. The emotional circuits require more effort to regulate. Mental fatigue appears earlier. Stress recovery slows. Then life does what life always does. Deadlines, traffic, bills, family responsibilities, breaking news notifications announcing yet another once-in-a-lifetime crisis for the 5th time this year. Modern humans rarely face saber-toothed cats. Instead, we face thousands of tiny stressors that accumulate like grains of sand. One grain weighs almost nothing. A million grains become a mountain. Now, combine that mountain with a nervous system already operating with slightly reduced flexibility. Not broken, just less adaptable. The difference is subtle until it isn't. Researchers studying chronic stress often describe something called allostatic load. Think of it as the wear and tear produced when your body repeatedly adjusts to challenges. Adaptation is healthy. Constant adaptation without sufficient recovery becomes expensive. It's like revving a car engine every few minutes. The engine survives for a while. Eventually, maintenance becomes unavoidable. Your muscles participate in this adaptation too. The neck and shoulders are particularly vulnerable because they remain active almost constantly. Even while sitting perfectly still, dozens of muscles are making thousands of microscopic adjustments every hour to stabilize your head, which is fortunate. Dropping your head every 30 seconds would make conversations awkward. But sustained stress changes how these muscles behave. Instead of alternating smoothly between contraction and relaxation, they may begin spending more time in low-level activation. Not enough to notice immediately, enough to matter over months. Scientists using electromyography have observed increased muscle activity in the upper trapezius during mentally stressful tasks in many individuals. Your body literally prepares for action while you're answering emails. Evolution deserves some credit for creativity, not necessarily for office ergonomics. And then comes sleep, or rather the lack of restorative sleep. Persistent stress frequently fragments sleep quality. Poor sleep reduces emotional regulation. Reduced emotional regulation increases perceived stress. Higher stress further disrupts sleep. The cycle feeds itself with remarkable efficiency. It's the biological equivalent of putting your washing machine inside your dryer and wondering why the electricity bill keeps climbing. Somewhere inside that loop, your muscles quietly receive the message. Stay ready. Don't relax yet. We might need you again, until one morning you wake up convinced you simply, quote, slept wrong. Maybe you did. Or maybe your body has been rehearsing that stiffness every night for months. And this brings us to the uncomfortable question almost nobody asks. If repeated iron loss contributes to lowering iron stores in certain people, and if lower iron availability can influence brain energy and stress regulation, who is actually at risk of entering this vicious cycle? Certainly not everyone who rolls up a sleeve to donate blood, but perhaps more people than we realize deserve a closer look. Let's make one thing absolutely clear before we go any further. Blood donation saves lives every single day. Hospitals depend on donated blood for trauma patients, cancer treatment, complicated surgeries, childbirth emergencies, and countless other situations where minutes separate survival from tragedy. None of what you're hearing changes that fact. The real question isn't whether blood donation is good. The question is whether every donor responds identically afterward. The answer is no. Human biology refuses to treat everyone the same. Some people replenish their iron stores efficiently. Others recover more slowly. Age matters. Sex matters. Diet matters. Menstrual blood loss matters. Pregnancy history matters. Underlying medical conditions matter. How frequently someone donates matters. Even genetics can influence how effectively the body absorbs and manages iron. Imagine two people withdrawing the same amount of money from their bank accounts every few months. One has a massive investment portfolio. The other is living paycheck to paycheck. The withdrawal is identical. The financial consequences are not. Iron stores behave in remarkably similar ways. Ferritin acts as your body's savings account. When blood is donated, iron leaves with it because red blood cells contain enormous amounts of this precious mineral. The body immediately begins replacing what was lost. If the savings account is healthy, recovery is usually straightforward. If the account was already running low, the story changes. Studies have consistently shown that frequent blood donors are more likely to develop depleted iron stores than people who donate infrequently. That's exactly why many experts encourage monitoring iron status in regular donors rather than assuming everyone automatically recovers at the same pace. Notice the wording, more likely, not guaranteed. Medicine almost never speaks in absolutes. If someone online tells you one single factor explains every chronic symptom you've ever experienced, close the video. Then maybe go outside and enjoy some sunlight. Reality is usually more interesting than miracle explanations. Now imagine something subtle. You donate blood. Weeks pass. You feel mostly normal. Months later, work becomes unusually demanding. Sleep becomes inconsistent. You skip a few balanced meals because life gets busy. Stress gradually increases. Your nervous system now faces multiple small pressures arriving simultaneously. Each one alone might be manageable. Together, they begin competing for the same biological resources. It's less like one giant explosion, more like hundreds of tiny leaks slowly emptying a reservoir. And here's the psychological trap. Because the changes occur gradually, your brain accepts each new level as the new normal. Humans are astonishingly adaptable. Sometimes that's our greatest strength. Sometimes it's exactly why problems remain invisible for so long. You stop remembering what fully rested felt like. You forget how easily your shoulders used to relax. You assume everyone feels exhausted after lunch. You believe waking up stiff every morning is simply part of getting older. Maybe, maybe not. The body whispers long before it screams. Persistent fatigue, reduced exercise tolerance, difficulty concentrating, feeling unusually cold. Restless legs in some individuals, reduced endurance, mood changes. In more pronounced iron deficiency, these symptoms become increasingly recognizable. But before they become obvious, the signals may be frustratingly vague. That's why self-diagnosis can be surprisingly unreliable. Neck pain alone doesn't diagnose iron deficiency. Neither does anxiety. Neither does fatigue. Those symptoms overlap with dozens of entirely different medical conditions, which is precisely why physicians combine history, physical examination, and appropriate laboratory testing instead of relying on internet quizzes asking whether your favorite color is blue. Science can be disappointingly less entertaining than social media. It is, however, considerably more trustworthy. So where does this leave us? Certainly not with fear. Fear helps nobody. The goal isn't to convince healthy people to avoid donating blood. That would ignore overwhelming evidence showing how essential voluntary blood donation remains for public health. Instead, the goal is awareness. Because awareness allows adjustment, monitoring, recovery, nutrition, timing, individualized medical advice. In other words, working with biology instead of assuming biology works identically for everyone. The remarkable part is that one of the simplest preventive strategies doesn't involve buying another expensive supplement with flames on the label and words like Ultra, Maximum, Bioactivator, Extreme. Marketing departments deserve awards for creativity, not necessarily for restraint. Sometimes the smarter solution begins with understanding your own physiology. Before your nervous system writes a story, your neck ends up reading every single morning. So where does this leave us? Not with panic, not with guilt, and certainly not with the bizarre conclusion that donating blood is somehow dangerous for everyone. That would be scientifically irresponsible. Instead, it leaves us with a far more interesting lesson. Your body keeps receipts. Every meal, every night of sleep, every stressful week, every hour of movement, every donation, every illness, every recovery. None of these events exist in isolation. They're constantly interacting inside an extraordinarily complex biological network. Think of your health like an orchestra. When one instrument plays a little softer, the audience may not notice. When 5 instruments drift out of rhythm at the same time, the entire performance changes. That's often how chronic symptoms develop. Rarely from one dramatic event. More often from dozens of tiny biological compromises stacking quietly until one morning your brain says, enough. The neck stiffness isn't necessarily the beginning. It's the final messenger, a physical translation of conversations your brain and body have been having for months. And here's the empowering part. Unlike many health myths that promise miracle cures, This story actually has practical solutions grounded in physiology. If you're an occasional blood donor who feels well, eats a balanced diet, and recovers normally, there's usually no reason to assume anything is wrong. Millions of people donate blood safely throughout their lives. The evidence overwhelmingly supports that reality. But if you're a frequent donor, especially if you also experience persistent fatigue, declining exercise performance, brain fog, restless legs, unexplained cold intolerance, or prolonged recovery, that isn't a reason for fear. It's a reason for curiosity. Curiosity is one of medicine's most powerful tools. Ask questions. Discuss your symptoms with your healthcare professional. If appropriate, ask whether evaluating your iron status, including ferritin, along with other relevant laboratory markers, makes sense in your particular situation. Because ferritin often provides a clearer picture of iron stores than hemoglobin alone. That's an important distinction many people never hear. And if iron stores truly are low, the solution isn't automatically swallowing the biggest iron supplement you can find online. Iron is one of those nutrients where more is definitely not always better. Excess iron can also create serious health problems. That's why supplementation should ideally follow medical evaluation and individualized guidance rather than internet enthusiasm. Your body isn't a houseplant. You don't fix every problem by adding more fertilizer. Sometimes nutrition itself deserves attention. Iron-rich foods, adequate protein, vitamin C alongside plant-based iron sources to improve absorption. Identifying dietary patterns that may limit iron intake. Allowing enough time for recovery after donation before assuming you're ready for another. Small adjustments. Evidence-based adjustments, not biohacking magic, just biology. There's another lesson hidden beneath all of this. Modern medicine has become extraordinarily good at treating disease. Sometimes we become less skilled at appreciating gradual physiological change before disease fully develops. That's where paying attention matters. Not obsessing, not catastrophizing, simply observing. How's your energy? How's your sleep? How's your recovery? How does your body respond over weeks rather than hours? Those questions often reveal more than dramatic headlines ever will. And perhaps the greatest irony is this: the same act capable of saving another person's life also reminds us to care for our own biology afterward. That's not selfish, it's sustainable. A healthy donor is exactly the kind of donor every healthcare system hopes will keep coming back for years. The goal has never been fewer donors. The goal is healthier donors. People who understand that generosity and self-care aren't competing values. They're partners, because when your own physiology is supported, your prefrontal cortex has the energy to keep emotional storms in check. Your stress system is more resilient. Your muscles are more likely to receive the message they've been waiting for all along. The danger has passed.
Finally let go.
And maybe that's the biggest misconception we challenge today. Your chronic tech neck may not be telling you to buy another chair, or another pillow, or another stretching gadget collecting dust in the closet beside last year's fitness resolutions. It may simply be asking a quieter question. Does your brain have everything it needs to feel safe? Sometimes the answer begins in your posture. Sometimes it begins in your habits. Sometimes it begins in your blood. The next time someone tells you health is about finding one magical trick, one miracle supplement, or one secret shortcut hidden from the rest of humanity, remember this: the human body has survived for hundreds of thousands of years without influence or discount codes. It thrives through balance, through adaptation, through respect for biology instead of arguments against it. That's rarely the most viral message, but it has one enormous advantage. It's much closer to the truth.